Welcome to Pat O'Keefe's World of Curiosities, a podcast where we talk about all things mystical, magical, and mysterious. Our guest tonight is Victoria Jaye. She is an author, researcher, and podcaster in the paranormal horror analysis spheres. Her book, The Black Hours, Modern Demonic Experiences and Folklore, expanded her master's thesis, and her work was done at Utah State University. Victoria's podcast, Demon Folklorist, can be found on Spreaker and on several other podcasting platforms where she talks demons, folklore, and horror movies. Her research interests are demonic narratives, experiences, phenomena, and media. Victoria also analyzes horror movies for her column, The Novelty Shop, on Morbidly Beautiful. She is currently expanding her research into classifying other types of negative supernatural experiences. Welcome, Victoria, to the world of curiosities.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. Now, I will tell you, first question I usually ask, we all have a path. Sometimes it's a spiritual path, and we become fascinated with topics based on experiences that we have had in the past, especially in our youth. When I was listening to some of your podcasts on your podcast on Spreaker, one of the things that piqued my attention is that you had what you at least thought was a possession experience at the age of 19. Tell us about that and also how this inspired you, if you will, to walk the path that you now walk, which is a world of curiosities about demons.
So, I had gone through multiple heartbreaks at 19, and unfortunately, it led me to a very dark headspace. And I believe that something took advantage of that, that it was looking for a way in. In all other ways, like I was still very new to the occult world. I had no idea what I was talking about with anything. I was still very young. And there was no other way for it to get in except through that dark headspace and being so heartbroken. And then I started having nightmares, really horrible ones about demons. And then I stopped being able to sleep. And food, I started throwing it up. And I just, because of that lack of sleep, I just got worse and worse and worse and much more delusional. And eventually it led to me being put into an institution because I had walked outside without proper clothing. I was wearing pajamas and I had been picked up first by the police and then taken to the hospital once they realized it was more of a mental health issue. And now this could easily just, I personally think it's easier to be like, oh, well, I had a mental break, like, and I've healed from that. But there was a lot of other stuff going on. Like my mother, my sister, and my father, who is about as psychic as mud. My mom and sister are much more psychic, and so am I. They all experienced phenomena leading up to that event. And there were just things that couldn't be easily explained by a psychotic break. Although I do have an anxiety disorder, and that was a part of it, just not being able to deal with the stress of what was happening. So I always tell people if you think that you have a demon or something of a malevolent nature, always take care of your mental health first, because that's the first thing that's going to suffer. But yeah, it took a while for me to heal from that. It took me at least 2 years fully. And that's not a timeline for anyone to go by. Everyone's healing is different. But that's how long it took me to fully move on from what had happened. But I used that when I was going to Utah State and I was getting my master's. I had originally wanted to go into horror movies and fairy tales because there is a connection between them. But then I wrote the paper and I was like, I don't care about this anymore. What else do I know about? And I had done a lot of extensive research on demons because of my experience. And I was like, oh, I wonder if anyone has done anything with demons in folklore. And it turns out not very much had been done. And what I was most interested was figuring out what can they do and what can't they do. And over time, the patterns sort of revealed themselves to me because I classified it by sight, sound, smell, and feeling. And that I used that to be able to identify what was a demon and what wasn't. And that's what I mainly do now. But I've also looked into other types of phenomena because I'm trying to find what are the differences and what are the similarities and how do we understand these things within the paranormal? Because there is a lot of confusion, especially when we have shows that are like, it's always a demon. And it's like, no, they're actually very rare. But when you are dealing with a demon, there's no mistaking it. So,
And just to mention too that if you are under a demonic attack, that your mental health is one of the things that you do have to worry about because there's
mhm,
constant oppression of that demonic source, whatever it may
mhm,
be. So one of the things that had happened in the past, in the very early days, when asylums or even poorhouses where they would put people is that priests would go into these places and they would do exorcisms. Do you
mhm.
think that that's something that maybe we should reconsider since we no longer do that? Or do you think it would just exacerbate people who already have mental illnesses? Or is there a middle road, or is it both at the same time?
I think it would be beneficial if we could do something sort of in a middle road, because that's a very good question. But at the same time, I do think religious trauma exists, and people tend to try and diagnose their own spiritual problems by being like, "Oh, this is definitely a demon." When I've found like I've had a lot of people contact me after my thesis was published online, and only once did I think it was a true demon. So that's maybe like 5% of the time. So I do think there's like an issue with trying to diagnose that problem and then going in with an exorcism, which they're dangerous. Nobody should be performing exorcisms unless they've been specifically trained how to do that. And then the person undergoing the exorcism is also in danger. But the activity is mainly focused outward at whoever's trying to interfere. But at the same time, I do think there are times in mental health, and actually, did you meet Ari Spence at the symposium?
I had my little granddaughter who appeared on my doorstep like magic at the last moment. So I wasn't able to stay. Instead, I took her to the Gettysburg battlefield. So unfortunately, no. But please tell me about this obviously intelligent and interesting person.
Mhm. So Ari's research focuses on how demonic possession at times is actually a manifestation of inner turmoil and trauma coming outward because the mind is so powerful. And really, like, you would think, like, I sought her out specifically. I also sought you out specifically because I wanted to tell you how much I loved your book, because I wanted to talk to her about her work in demonology, because we're actually pretty rare when it comes to these sort of events. Like, not everyone wants somebody who works in demonology. But I was like, oh, yeah, tell me about what you're working on. And at first, she had sort of been like, "Oh, well, I kind of disagree about this," but then I had explained deeper about my research, and truly I think our research complements each other, because there are times that it is not a demon. There are times that the mind is so powerful that it can create phenomena. We've seen that in poltergeist and PK energy. So, I don't think it's like me versus her or anything like that. We're all just trying to understand the paranormal. But yeah.
Well, when you said it was serious business, it is. And I know that Hollywood dramatizes it like in The Exorcist, but there are truisms to how in that particular movie it was actually portrayed. I mean, because, someone during an exorcism can show all of the things that they show during the exorcism, even
Mhm.
the raising of the skin and the words that are written on the skin. So,
Mhm.
yes, the mind is extremely powerful, but speaking from someone, and we talked earlier about, not wanting to connect, but having had connected unwillingly with a negative energy that we would call a demon, there is that energy. Although I do agree with you, I think it's absolutely I don't even watch these shows, and I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
I don't
There's
either.
very few. Yeah, the second time somebody raises their hand and says, "It's a demon," I
Mhm.
promise you, I have been doing this work, in the paranormal, in mediumships, and the psychic realms for eons, and it's a handful of times that I have encountered what we would call demonic energy. Now, I encounter, and I think most people do, just mean people in spirit,
Mhm.
right? For some reason, a lot of people think that we get whitewashed whenever we cross over, but to the other side, but we are still the same people, and there are people who would rather stay here and create havoc than deal with the karmic, retribution of their lifetime, and simply
Mhm.
stay and cause grief to people. I want to mention too, there's a very famous case of exorcism that I'm sure most of us have heard of, and that is Annalise Michel, and she was
Mhm.
a French girl, and the Catholic exorcism rites, I think that she went through 67 exorcisms, and eventually she did pass away. She had been diagnosed with epileptic psychosis. So again, that whole idea of the mind coming into play. So, and for anybody that is interested, if you want to hear something that is truly bone chilling, listen to the tapes of that particular or one of the particular exorcisms with her, because it is frightening. I mean, her whole voice, there is no way this voice can be coming from a small woman. It's
Mhm.
and the words that are being used and the inflection, and even though she's speaking a different language, it's terrifying. It resonates at a spiritual level. So what we asked, or I asked this earlier, and I said, I I think you should be a spiritual warrior. And you said, I think I already am. And I think you are too. I think you're one of the things that you're doing is you're informing people, right?
Mhm.
And working on this beautiful classification. So you told us that the reason you came up with this is you looked around and there really wasn't anything like it. But
Mhm.
let's break this down. By the way, there's a wonderful video on YouTube that features you, and listen to that also, and she speaks on these 3 subjects. So if you're interested in this, please look her video up on YouTube. It is worth the hear, and the listen, and I will bring that up in just a little bit so you can see it. But Victoria, your classification, I know it's dealing with negative energies. Could you tell us how you would classify a demon so that people can hear, and then we'll look at, what you said. We could look at jinn, we could look at skinwalkers, and even shadow people, and just tell them the different things. But let's start with, the different markers in the classification. But let's start with demons.
So, when I define a demon, I define them by what they can do. And the reason I do that is because we don't know what demons are. We have our interpretations, we have religion to give us an interpretation sometimes. In other cases, it doesn't always add up. Like, I, for instance, don't believe that all demons are angels. I think some of them are. But how that process works, I'm not really sure. And no, I'm not exactly a demonologist. I call myself a demon folklorist because I look at the folklore and the stories, and I don't do what demonologists do. I don't go into these places. I'm a little too psychically sensitive to be able to be much help. Um, and I don't look at old languages or documents, trying to do research on the demonic in past ages. So I focus on the present, and that's why I added the word modern in my title of my book, because I was looking really at the past, I want to say 50 years or so. But the system shows me what is difficult. Like, it's really hard to put all of that research into like a smaller sentence, but I'll do the best I can. So really what I did is that I had all of these stories and I was like, okay, how do I divide what is happening in this instance between what's happening in this instance, right? And it's because of what is happening, the specific phenomena, the what is being manifested by the demon in the different phases. I did encroachment, infestation, and oppression phenomena to start with. Those are the three things that interest me the most. I also, for my book, did a possession classification system because I know people are interested in that and what that looks like. But I sort of like separated them out, and it's like, okay, in this instance, even though it's all the same event, it's like, okay, there's levitation over here. Okay, this is going to go here. And in the same event, there could be somebody being thrown against the wall, or what else did they do? A humongous temperature drop because they're sucking all of the energy out of the room just to manifest. So I just sorted them all out, and I was able to come across like it came into sight, sound, smell, and feeling. Because every other feeling that you can think of, when I was first doing this research and I had gone to an academic conference with it, people were asking me, what about balance? What about, but I think that all can be sorted into feeling. So people do lose their balance when there is demonic energy present, but demons, to circle back, because this is so much information. Sorry, y'all. Demons are hyper intelligent. They are malevolent towards humans in their behavior, always. For people who think that a demon is in love with them on the internet, you are wrong. If it is a real, fully fledged demon, they absolutely hate humans. And the way that I separate them out is by my little acronym. I call it EPIM: evil presence, intensity, and malice. That's how you tell the difference between a demon and something else. And then, let's see. So that's how I tend to classify them. There is a little bit more to that definition. I should have had it pulled up because I always forget something from it. But yeah, they are incredibly malevolent and they hate Christian iconography, especially. It seemingly is that they're allergic to it. And they are always going to have a reaction. So there's that. And then when it came to this classification system, I simply wanted to know what they could do. What was it that they could do and what couldn't they do? And what do these narratives, because everyone's experience is different, but there are patterns. I wanted to find the pattern. So the way that I did this, for instance, this was my talk in Gettysburg. I had trouble with it, and I'm so thankful for my current boyfriend because he went through it with me and was like, "Okay, I don't understand this. Could you explain this part more?" And just really helped me to fully flesh out a really difficult topic. Classification's not easy, and it is something that you have to pay a lot of attention to the things that you're seeing. And if you don't, you can easily miss something. But I did find that demons, skinwalkers, and shadow people are very commonly mistaken for each other, but they all seemingly have these, what I call markers, which are these are the things that define that experience. So demons have their own set of markers that are separate from shadow people, separate from skinwalkers, what have you. And because what it seems like is that not every entity that exists in the paranormal can do the same things. If they could, all of the phenomena would be uniform, but it's not. So I focus on those differences a lot, but also the similarities of trying to warn people, especially paranormal investigators, like, hey, you should never come across something that is negative and be like, oh, that's a demon. And this is why, based on this, and this, you know? So that was really what I was trying to show, that there are similarities, but the differences are what make that experience unique to that entity. So,
You told us why you decided to write the book, but other than, this classification, I mean, what could readers expect from the book?
there is going to be some background information. That's what I start off with, because it's such a big topic that you really can't just like jump in. You have to establish the history of demons. I looked at the Abrahamic religions because when people think of demons, that's generally what they're thinking about, especially in like the Catholic sense. And demons definitely do exist in other cultures, but it seems like the thinking is very slightly different. And looking at demons in other cultures does interest me, but it's not what I'm working on at the moment. I have to do things one at a time, otherwise I'll get nothing done. So I looked at Abrahamic religions. I defined what I believe a demon is as far as the phenomena and what they can do versus what they can't. Talked about how sometimes there are magic practitioners who use the word demon, but I don't believe that they're talking about the same thing as me. And that is something that comes up in occult spaces where really it seems like people mean the word daemon, which is where the word demon came from, which is a spirit of great power. If they're willing to help a human, they're not a demon, at least not in the way that I define them. But that usage is still there. And it's kind of like I was talking to Vanessa Vasilico on her podcast about it. And she was like, kind of like how like some people want to reclaim the swastika from Nazis. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly kind of what it's like. Not to demonize anybody in the magical community, because I personally think that like witches, pagans, they're all wonderful people. But the metaphor is good because even though the swastika once meant something different than what it means now, it now means that almost exclusively. We can't really separate the two anymore. Somebody sees a swastika, they're going to think Nazi. So, unfortunately, demon also has that connotation. So, I think using it isn't really the best practice, but I also understand why it's being used. So, I wanted to put that in there just so that there was no confusion. What else? Oh, talking about paranormal TV and horror movies and how that's affected the landscape of demonology. And there is a lot of interest. Since my thesis was published in 2021, I didn't really find it very hard to break into paranormal spaces because it is something, it's a buzzword, comes up a lot, and people want to know what the truth is. So there was that. And then I went into, in each chapter, what are the markers for demons when it comes to sight, sound, smell, and feeling. Oh, gonna knock something over. And then on top of that, the system itself. So I'll have a piece of phenomena like, let's see, someone being thrown across the room, right? It will have several examples, or at least one example, where this has happened and manifested. And right now, my book is going through a re edit because unfortunately, my publisher went under. So I'm republishing it, and I wanted to fix it so it was less of like a laundry list of like, oh, this happened, and more readable. I also wanted to include illustrations from my wonderful illustrator, Chris Maxwell, who did my cover. I wanted him to bring to life some of this horrific phenomena so that people could see what this could possibly look like, such as one of the ones that comes to mind is hybrid creatures. They will sometimes project an image of something that's not quite human and not quite animal, but something in between to terrify you.
Well, you had mentioned, and I've got a question. You had mentioned skinwalkers, as one of the ones that people get confused. Can a skinwalker be in the dream state? Can that happen in the dream state? And let me mention why. This was very strange. I knew a person, and she was very sweet and very religious. I mean, spiritual. And there was a woman that she didn't like because the first woman that was very spiritual was a very hard worker, and the second one was not and happened to be her employee.
Mhm,
And one day, this woman, the woman who was the boss, told me, she said, I have dreams and I know what my totem animal is. And I said, please tell me. And she said, it's a white It's a big white dog. It's a big white dog. I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Okay." Well, one day her employee and I had happened to be in the same space, and she said, "Pat, I am having the worst nightmares." And I said, "Do tell." And because I always have an interest for this. And she said, "I keep dreaming that this big white wolf is running after me." And she got ill not too long after that, which is one of the criteria when I was looking over your research that, people often become ill, or worse when they encounter a skinwalker. And so my question is, it's interesting that it meets most of the requirements of a skinwalker in that she could be projecting. You see what I'm saying? In the dream
mhm,
state. And I realize that it's outside of human, really,
mhm,
and yet it is human. You see what I'm saying? The
mhm,
original dreamwalkers, I mean, they were humans, were they not? They received
mhm.
power to be able to walk in another skin. What's your opinion on that?
I think that it makes perfect sense to me, and my guess as to what's happening there is that this woman had shamanic abilities, because to be a skinwalker in the first place, you have to be a shaman, and you have to be taught how to do it, because it's not something that people are really born with. Although I think the ability is born, learning how to enact it is a different thing, and now it is a exclusively evil thing. When once upon a time, like the Dreamwalkers, the original Skinwalkers, it was given to them, it seems, as a gift to help the people. But now, to be initiated, you have to go down what they call the witchery way, and you have to kill somebody close to you that you love. So, just a really horrible sacrifice, it seems like, because I think there was probably another entity that could do the same thing, abilities. Because to be a skinwalker in the first place, you have to be a shaman, and you have to be taught how to do it, because it's not something that people are really born with. Although I think the ability is born, learning how to enact it is a different thing. And now it is a exclusively evil thing. When once upon a time, like the Dreamwalkers, the original Skinwalkers, it was given to them, it seems, as a gift to help the people. But now, to be initiated, you have to go down what they call the witchery way, and you have to kill somebody close to you that you love. So, just a really horrible sacrifice, it seems like, because I think there was probably another entity that could do the same thing, but and really preyed on human foibles. So the things that we want, like greed and revenge and the dark parts of humans, it preyed on that and then told them, here's another way to do it. And if you sacrifice to me, and it sounds like a demon to me, but I can't really confirm that. I would need lot more information to be able to look at that. But that's just what it sounds like, that it something else gave them the ability and people used it. And there are instances where people have an they have an experience with a skinwalker, and dreams are a huge component of it. That these things almost always start with nightmares. So I think that that place that they're walking in when they're not in their physical bodies is the astral. It is the dream state.
I think that when we're released from the things that keep us bound, like our consciousness and awareness and not wanting to harm another person, when we're released from that in the dream state, I think that maybe we unleash the beast within us, if that makes sense. And I think that could have happened with her. What about shadow people? Well, before we leave demons, what was the most fascinating thing that you feel you learned about demons as you were doing your research?
They aren't nearly as powerful as they'd like us to believe. They are bound by laws and they can't break them. And if they do, it's it seems that they are punished for it, or that they are stopped by something. Some people call them angelic presences. It just depends on the person you ask. But demons are not all powerful. If they were, I don't think that these laws, these divine laws that keep them bound would exist. And that they use a lot of the same tricks, even the really powerful ones. So they also cannot create. That was something I came across. They can move things around, they can steal from the physical, but they cannot create things. Not the way that humans can. So it could be a reason why they hate us. It's really hard to say exactly what's going on there, but it does seem there's a lot of blame about what happened to them, given the story that a lot of them were once angels and were cast out of heaven. They definitely blame humans for that because they like to talk about it a lot. Like they like never shut up about how unfair God's kingdom is and how much they hate him and all that sort of thing.
What about shadow people? What kind of things did you discover as you were researching shadow people?
The thing that I found the most interesting is that shadow people seem to be an easy form for any entity to take because they show up in so many different narratives that it is the first thing that people see. Demons do it, skinwalkers do it, shadow people on their own do it. And I think there's even been classification errors within I think it's six or seven different groupings of shadow people. Some of them could be exclusively demons, some of them could be jinn, because jinn also show up as shadow people. So I think that they're not the real thing that they are. They're a form that they're taking to manifest into our realm. But other than that, they also seem to show up for very different reasons. So I haven't abandoned it completely, but I had to sort of step back from shadow people because it might be too big of a project for me to classify into a book, since there are other instances of high strangeness that don't really fit into certain entities that we associate with shadow people, that are having shadow people show up in the narrative. And sometimes it is because of negative energy in the person's life calling to them. Or that's what it seems like. That would be my interpretation of what's happening. Negative events going on in a person's life. There are even times where they show up simply to herald something, to say an event is going to be happening. And only later do people make that judgment as to what that event was. And there are even times that it is positive instead of negative. So I simply think it's a easy form for anything to take in the paranormal.
And let me ask, and this is not something that I know that you had studied, and I want to ask you something about it, and that's the black-eyed children. Have you heard of them?
Mhm,
Black-eyed children? Okay.
mhm.
Well, what do you think these children are? And describe them to our listeners so that they have an idea because it's one of the it's not as popular, if you will, in popular culture as some of the other phenomena.
Yeah, so the experience of black-eyed children seemingly is it's almost always that they come up to the door and knock on it, and when you open it, there will be a child or a group of smaller children standing there, but their eyes are all black, and they will want to come in, and you're not supposed to let them in. I haven't looked into them super deeply, but I do think there's interesting phenomena there. It's, like, on my list of the millions of entities that I want to look at, but I don't have time to at the moment, but it's on there. Just because it is so interesting that these experiences are so uniform. But
I mean, it is fascinating. I'm like you, I haven't
yeah.
delved deep, but
Mhm.
I read a couple of stories of eyewitness accounts, and one man did let them in, and he really didn't notice their eyes, and when he did, it's like he became, dread is part of the interaction, and he had so much dread, he actually snuck out his own house through a window to get out of the house and away from them. And another one, a couple was just sitting in their car, and this child just starts beating on the car window, wanting in, and she almost rolled her window down until she saw the eyes, and that's when the window stayed up and they left. So like interacting with a demon, it's a situation where all you want to do, from what I've read, is really get away from it. But it could be because there's such an anomaly, the eyes are so distinctive that it simply scares people. And one thing about skinwalkers, I have to ask, have you ever watched Skinwalker Ranch or read any of the books about that location?
Actually, the only reason I know about it because I don't watch paranormal shows unless, like, my friends are in it and I'm like, "Oh, I wanna support whoever." I Yeah, my mom watches it. And she was telling me, yeah, Skinwalker Ranch is weird. And I hadn't really thought about looking into it until I was looking for a topic for Gettysburg. And I was like, yeah, I've never really looked into skinwalkers. I don't really know what they do, but I have heard about the anomalies. And what I personally think is happening at Skinwalker Ranch and certain areas, because when I talked to Timothy Renner, yeah, so I was sat next to him at the dinner that Alex had provided for all of us. And we were talking about phenomena. And I realized very quickly, this is getting very slightly off topic, but skinwalkers and Bigfoot have very strange similarities. I actually think that they might. I don't know what Bigfoot are. I could tell you exactly, but I do know that the phenomena is very, very similar to the point that it makes me wonder if it's a yin yang thing. Were they once human? I don't know, but whatever they are, they're similar in nature. They exist in the liminal of physical and spiritual. But I think what Skinwalker Ranch is, and something he alerted me to, is that there are parts of the US in like UFO flaps, places where high strangeness is very, very prevalent. And he was telling me about Gettysburg, and I'm like, and then Josie Bluegrass was talking about how it's one of the biggest quartz deposits in the US. And I didn't know that. And I'm like, are these in places where there's a lot of quartz? Because quartz, I'm sure you know, amplifies energy. So maybe it just makes whatever's in that area heightened. And then Skinwalker Ranch, I think, is a portal field. I think it is a place where the veil is very, very thin and portals are being used by all sorts of interdimensional creatures and entities. The oddities, the things that are seemingly from left field. I like to focus on what exactly is going on in that moment, as far as like, why did this one piece of phenomena only happen in this one narrative? Why do we not see it again? But what is great about the efficacy of my research is that eventually I will see it in another narrative. So I think that's probably like what interests me the most, that it seems, even though like we all know as researchers that we are not always going to get it right. I fully admit when I'm wrong about something or my mind has become changed based on new information, because anybody who's sitting here being like, I am an expert in the paranormal, it's like, are you though? Like, are any of us? We're all doing the best we can with the senses that we have, limited or expanded, to understand something that we, by definition, maybe cannot understand fully, but we do the best we can, right? So there is that big, like, in the paranormal, like, is anybody an expert? I think that we have our research and we're gonna try to do the best we can, but I accept that my research might be flawed fundamentally, because new research may come at any time to go, oh, this is actually not the best way to do this. But it is pretty cool though so far that I haven't seen the flaws just yet. Doesn't mean they're not there, but that my research seems to prove that there are very noticeable patterned differences in all of these entities. But there are also similarities, so we can start to make connections that we possibly didn't understand before. Like, I didn't know that Bigfoot and skinwalkers were similar. That sounds insane, right? Like, if you just say it without the actual research. But I'm sitting here talking to a Bigfoot researcher, and I'm like, you know what that sounds like? Because I had just done that research. So those are the things I think that are the most surprising, that it's all probably very connected and it's also not at times as well. So I'm looking to figure out what those connections are, and what are the similarities, what are the differences, what can we further understand. So I think that's what my research, that's the most surprising things, just how connected things are. I thought they were all different.
And it's interesting too because a lot of the research in the paranormal, in all aspects of it, and the spiritual world is it's non-quantitative because how are you
Mhm,
going to crunch numbers in most of the research? So we do narrative research, and then we
mhm,
extract, like you did, from your research in order to be able to come up with all of these markers for the different categorization of anomalous, what would you call them, entities?
mhm.
And let me ask you before we leave, because I would like to touch, since you're a folklorist, touch on witches and this really nasty reputation that they have gotten over the eons. Do you think it's deserved?
Not at all. Every single witch I have ever met, and this the problem is, like, I happen to love witches. I think they're great. I think some of them are a lot more in the spirit of what we think a Christian should be like than a lot of Christians. I've actually seen Christians turn their backs on people who needed help, while witches were more than willing to get involved, especially with spiritual problems. So I happen to have a special love for witches, but that doesn't mean that every single witch is doing magic that is perfectly, what's the word I'm looking for? That isn't harmful. There are some witches who do harmful magic, but overarchingly, the narrative that all witches are evil and all of this is so wrong, that if you talk to them for 5 seconds, you realize that they're some of the warmest people. So I don't think that they should have that reputation at all, and that a lot of it is based around fear that actually came from upper clergymen who were simply afraid, I think, of these people, mostly women, but not always, taking their power away from them because they might be able to persuade people that, oh, well, my healing is going to be greater than that of the church or what have you, whatever type of folk magic or cunning folk or any of that.
Well, unfortunately, it's been a fascinating conversation. I hope to have you back on at some point. I do want to share with folks your Spreaker page, just so they'll know where to find you on Spreaker. And here we are with that lovely smile and demon folklorist, and you can see some of the topics here: skinwalkers, Appalachian. This is one of my favorites: Appalachian folk lore and magic. We got media's demons. How do you pronounce it? Debukum, Dibuk,
Dibukim.
Dibicum, Dibbikim, psychics, and women. So she's got quite a wide range of topics. So if you would like to go and catch her there, and we've talked about her book. And what, Victoria, do you have coming up that you would like to mention to our audience?
At the moment, let's see. I have a few different things coming up. I kind of overloaded myself this end of the year. I have a Winters Author Festival I'm going to in Pine Bluffs because I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And it's like a little town, like 40 minutes away, because I work out at the branches. And then I have Darkness Con coming up in Denver. So if anybody is in Denver and they want to come say hi, I definitely encourage that because I think it'll be fun. It's like a horror movie convention, and they do have like a paranormal track. Richard Estep is going to be there, Aaron Taylor, all sorts of fun people. So definitely check that out. I'm working on republishing my book. And then I have Haunted America. I'll be presenting for the first time next year, and then you'll be there too. So that'll be a lot of fun.
If you haven't presented there yet, it really is, and the people are so wonderful. Alex Matsuo is going to be there, who does the
Awesome.
Paranormal Research Symposium, and I know that you've written a paper also for the symposium's journal, which is supposed to be out,
Mhm.
I think, in January. So I think we're
Oh,
both
yeah, that's right.
excited about that, to see that come out. And so I'd like to thank our guest tonight for being with us, Victoria Jaye. I'd like to thank the audience for being here. Without you, well, it'd be a lonely place. So tune in next time for Pat O'Keefe's World of Curiosities. And until then, stay curious.